Whew, it is windy out here today. Nice. All right, well, welcome to Northern Arizona, the pine forest here outside of Flagstaff. Once again, it's a beautiful day here on a Sunday afternoon. You should all be out riding right now. And I was out here playing in the woods on my CRF300LS, and I realized that it's been just about a year since I bought this bike. And I've got about 1,700 miles on it. I've put all the accessories on it that I think I'm gonna put on it. I've ridden it just about on every type of surface, sand, pavement, technical class 5, crazy trails. I've taken it on some long trips, and I just figured this would be a great time to now tell you what I think about this bike. But before I do that, I do want to add a little disclaimer here, because I think it's really important that we all think about the fact that anytime we review a product that we purchase with our own money, there is this inherent bias that we carry because we don't want to admit to ourselves if we've perhaps spent our hard-earned money on something that's maybe not so great. And I think a great example of that would be my review of my Honda Trail 125. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved that bike. I still stand by the fact that I think it's a great bike for what it is, a commuter and small trail or farm bike, but I do not think it's a dual sport or adventure bike. It's just too small. And that's all part of the process I went through to discover kind of my dream garage of having a mid-size adventure bike, a role currently held by my Himalayan, and a smaller, lightweight, true dual sport that I can take out on places like this, but still feel comfortable on, that I'm not gonna drop it, that's light enough that I can still flick around. And most importantly, it's lower to the ground. And that was the big thing that I loved about this bike, is that it's the LS, it's the shorter model. I am only 5'9", 175 centimeters, 32-inch inseam, and I can flat foot on this bike. So if I'm going through deep sand and I gotta put my feet down, I can do that on this bike. So the first category I have on here is comfort, which I rated an 8.5 out of 10. I will say that I really enjoy the suspension as it is. I know a lot of people say that this bike has a soft suspension, but for someone of my height and weight, 5'9", 155 pounds, I think it's perfect. I haven't adjusted the rear spring at all. Everything is sort of standard stock configuration, and I've only bottomed the front forks out once. So I do think that the suspension is perfect for someone of my size and stature. I think if you're over 200 pounds, you probably have to make a few adjustments, and you might have a little bit more concern with bottoming out the front forks. I think the ride is mostly enjoyable, mostly comfortable. I think standing feels fairly natural. I do think it feels a little bit better with the slightly higher bars now. The wind can be a bit much in the stock configuration. Obviously, there's no windshield, so if you're on the highway doing 70 miles an hour, it's blasting in your face. But even with the windshield, the wind kind of comes up and then hits the top of my helmet anyway. So I'm still getting some wind buffeting regardless. Now the seat obviously is the factory seat, and given that this is the LS, it's actually a little thinner than the standard L. But even with that said, I find it perfectly adequate and comfortable as long as it's under a 6-hour day. I think once you start getting into sort of that 6 to 8 hour in the saddle type day, it does get a little bit uncomfortable. It's certainly not as comfortable as my Himalayan seat concept seat, but I do think for a dual sport, it is far superior to some of the planks that I've sat on. One last note I would make about the suspension is that I do believe that the L and the LS are sprung a little bit stiffer than the Rally. So sometimes you'll see footage of the Rally online and it looks like that back end really bucks up and down. I haven't had that problem on this bike. The back end is a lot stiffer. So I do think with this bike versus the Rally that you get a little bit better suspension feel. So the next thing I have on my list is quality, which I've rated a 9 out of 10, and I know what you're thinking, that that's pretty high, but it's a Honda, and it feels like a Honda. It feels like it's made with high quality parts. It feels like it's going to stand up to the test of time. Anytime I've worked on it, I feel like I'm working on good parts, things that I'm not gonna strip or that are gonna break. I feel like The fact that the service intervals are so insanely far apart is really fantastic. I have to do valve checks on the Himalayan every 3,000 miles. You don't have to do oil changes on this bike until 8,000 miles, and valve checks every 16,000. Now, I'm not going to personally wait that long, but you can if you want, because technically that's within spec of the owner's manual. So that's crazy that you can go 16,000 miles without a valve check. But again, it speaks to the quality of this bike. Something else I have written down here under quality is actually the instrument cluster. And I think that's a really important point. I've been on dual sport bikes where there's no fuel gauge, where there's no gear indicator. And this has everything you could possibly want. It has all the gauges, warning lights, the ABS on-off switch, and it's easy to read. Everything you'd need without anything extraneous. So I just think you're getting a very high quality instrument cluster for a budget dual sport. So the next thing I've got on my list is fuel range, which I've ranked a 7.5 out of 10. And for obvious reasons, right? This is a small dual sport. It's got a 2.1 gallon tank. You're not gonna get super far on that. I think I average about 65 to 70 miles per gallon. So the most I've ever gone on one tank was about 130 miles or so, before I started to get really worried about running out of gas. And obviously I could go out and put an aftermarket larger tank on it, but I really don't want to do that. I like the look and the aesthetic of the bike. And if I need more fuel, that's what this 1 gallon extra canister is for in the back. And I've certainly used it. And yes, it adds an extra step at the gas station, but yeah, like I said, I just don't have a desire to go through all that rigmarole of putting that larger tank on. All right, so the next thing I've got on my list here for this bike, and this is gonna be a little controversial, but I have handling and rideability, and I've rated the CRF300LS a 9.5 out of 10. Now, before you tell me I'm being biased here, I think it's really important to understand just how easy it is to ride this bike. I cannot stress this enough. I am still a novice, and you have seen some of the ridiculous stuff that I've done on this bike, stuff I wouldn't dream of on the Himalayan. And the fact that it's 2 inches lower to the ground just makes it even more accessible. And yes, there's other bikes that are equivalent. There's the, what is it, the Yamaha 250, the XT250, also a little bit lower to the ground, but I cannot stress just how easy it is to learn on and ride on this bike. So I would highly recommend this bike for someone that's looking to get into riding, especially someone that might be a little shorter or just want a little bit more confidence, being able to put both feet down. Standing on it feels comfortable, moving it around feels comfortable. If I have to put a foot down quick to dab, it's easy, I don't stress about it. The few times that the bike has started to fall over, I've easily been able to recover it before it falls. I've only dropped this bike one time, and that was a complete idiotic user error because I tried to turn the handlebar too tightly while I was on an incline and it just went straight over. That was just a stupid mistake. I shouldn't have dropped it there, but I did. But other than that, every place I've ever taken this bike, I've never dropped it. Since then, never, not once. So single drop in the year that I've had it. So that, again, just speaks to how easy it is to control this bike. It's really helped build my confidence. Now, one small disclaimer is that because it is lower to the ground, obviously you lose a little bit of ground clearance. You lose, I think, 1 or 2 inches of ground clearance as compared to the standard L. That has never been a problem for me. I have never been in a situation where I have scraped over something and been like, if I just had that 1 extra inch of clearance, I would have made it over this giant boulder. The next thing I've got on my list is practicality, and I do rate it a 9 out of 10. I suppose something like a scooter would probably be a little bit more practical as a commuter. Just as a true dirt bike would be more practical for off-roading. But for a legitimate true dual sport, this is about as practical as you can get. So that's why I rated it so high, a 9 out of 10. Even though it's lower to the ground and has slightly lower clearance, you still get the 21-18 wheel combo. So it makes for rolling over things much easier. It's meant for playing around on some tough stuff, but yet I take this into work almost every day as my commuter. So it's just a really practical bike for doing just about anything you can imagine. With one exception, I haven't taken this bike on any sort of long moto camping trip yet, but I do have some soft bags on order, and I am planning to take this on a several day trip this summer. So we'll come back to that at some point in a few months. Next on the list is durability, which I've ranked not applicable. And the reason I did that is because so far so good. I've only had the bike for a year, but I don't feel like I can truthfully speak to this bike after just 1 year. I think I really need to own this bike for a couple of years to talk about its reliability. So far, yeah, it's been fine, but 1,700 miles, 1 year, I've been pretty gentle with it, so nothing's fallen off of it, I guess. Yeah, I think that's why I can't really give it an honest review as far as durability. Serviceability, 9.5 out of 10. Which is a little bit biased, I will admit, because I haven't done much servicing on the bike. I've done 2 oil changes. Both took me less than an hour, but both were incredibly easy. I didn't have to do anything weird. I didn't have to remove any parts or the skid plate or anything. I've replaced the air filter, which is just behind the panel. I've serviced the battery and plugged in some wires. Everything I've done to this bike has been fairly simple, with the exception of some of the accessories that I put on. Took a little bit of finagling because technically they were made for the L, not the LS. Obviously it's fuel injected, so I don't have to worry about a carburetor, which is a good thing since I live at 7,000 feet. Now I haven't done the valves yet, but I suspect that will also be a fairly doable job as well. So we'll see, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it at 16,000 miles. That's crazy, 16,000 miles. Next thing I've got on here is brakes, which I've rated a 9 out of 10. The front is a single 256 millimeter disc with twin piston calipers, and the rear is a 220 single disc. And you know, I don't really know what to say other than they've been adequate. They definitely have better stopping power than my Himalayan. The few times I've had to slam on the brakes a little hard when an elk darted out in front of me, it stopped me pretty quickly. And it does come standard with ABS. That is something important to note, is the LS only comes with ABS. You can't get the LS non-ABS. You can get the L non-ABS, but the LS only comes with the ABS. However, it is switchable, so I can turn the rear ABS off, which is what I do every time I take it off-road doing something like this. I like having ABS for the highway riding and for those elk incidents on the highway, so I am appreciative of having the ABS. The next category I have down here is, I think, an obvious one, given the nature of this bike, but I put down a category for seat height, because I think that is a really important variable for a lot of you looking at motorcycles. And yes, I rated this a 10 out of 10. This is the only thing in my entire rating that I gave a 10 out of 10. And it's for obvious reasons. That was a huge motivator for me buying this bike, and why I went with the LS and not the L or a different model. For the record, the seat height is listed as 32.7. I have a 32-inch inseam, and when I sit on this bike and it gets the little bit of squat, I can flat foot. So I would say the practical seat height is probably more like 31.7. I think it probably squats about an inch, and that would make sense because I just barely flat foot. Measure your inseam, or if you know your inseam, if you're 32 or greater, you will flat foot on this bike. That is a huge reason that I bought this bike and why I rated it a 10 out of 10. Now, I did say this before, there's 9.6 inches of ground clearance, 9.3 inches of travel on the front suspension, and 9 in the rear. So the suspension is a little bit squatted down from the standard L. You lose like an inch on the suspension, and you lose about an inch in the seat. It has not been a problem for me. I've never had to worry about the suspension not being enough or the ground clearance not being enough. The next category I have on here is weight, which I've given it a 9 out of 10. The curb wet weight listed on the Honda website for the LS is 311 pounds. But with my skid plate, crash bars, all the accessories I put on, it's probably closer to like 330, but it doesn't feel like 330 pounds. It feels like it's about 300 pounds. The way that I can kind of move it around and lean it and just get the feel for the weight, it feels so much lighter than the Himalayan. A couple more categories here. I've got tires. I rated an 8 out of 10. Maybe a 7.5 out of 10. You know, it's hard to fully rate these tires. I've only had the bike for 1,700 miles, but these IRCs that come from the factory, I do think are perfectly fine. I mean, I'm starting to see a little bit of wear in the rear, so I imagine I'll probably get, you know, 4,000 miles or something out of them. But everything I've taken this bike through, the tires have handled fine, with the exception of maybe the deep sand. Now, obviously, if I were to go out and get some Dunlops or something that were stickier, they would be a little bit better off-road, but they probably would wear faster on the pavement. So I gotta say, Honda, you know, I think these tires are pretty good for factory tires. And I have no desire to replace them until they wear out. Now, once they wear out, who knows? Maybe I will put something a little stickier on them, but I think if you're worried about tires, if you're a novice and you're like, are these tires gonna be adequate for off-road? These are knobbies and they work perfectly fine in the rough stuff. You've seen the stuff I've taken this bike on, and never once did the bike not just go. It always just goes. It's never slipped out, it's never lost traction, it's just gone every time. So I cannot complain. So the next category I have on here is price. And I do rate this bike a 9 out of 10 for price. I think for a brand new dual sport, so that's the key there, brand new, with this sort of comfort, reliability, low seat height, 2118 tires, decent brakes, decent tires, lightweight, all of the other positives that I've mentioned, you'd be hard pressed to find a better deal. Now, yes, you're gonna get screwed at the dealership. There's just no way around it. I think I probably paid out the door close to $6,500 for this bike, if I remember correctly, which, you know, all the upcharges the dealer charges you, yeah, it's not fair and you get screwed. But I think the bike value itself, the MSRP, is definitely worth it for what you get for this bike. I mean, this bike was only $1,000 more than the Trail 125, which is bonkers to me when I think about how much more I'm getting compared to the Honda Trail 125. I do have a quick note on here about transmission. I've rated it an 8 out of 10. It does come with a 6-speed gearbox, which has been a nice upgrade from the Himalayan, which only has 5 speeds. It also comes standard with a slipper clutch, which is really nice for those downshifts. I will say that it is geared very short. So the standard gearing is 1440 tooth combination, and I do think it's perfectly fine for the trails, but when you're doing higher speed, getting to the trails, those first couple of gears are geared very short and you're shifting a lot. So first gear is almost unusable unless you're just putting along the trail. So I think if you wanted to, that's easily fixable by just swapping out for a different tooth combination in your chain rings, your sprockets or whatever, but it does come geared pretty short. So keep that in mind. Aesthetics, I forgot I had that on here. And I did lie earlier when I said that the seat height was the only thing I rated a 10 out of 10. I actually rate the aesthetics of this bike a 10 out of 10. And I know this is very subjective, but damn, I gotta say, this bike is just sexy, man. I love the look of this bike. I adore it. I simply adore it. I love getting on it. I love looking at it. I'm not a huge fan of the Honda Red, and I know that's kind of sacrilege to some people. So when I saw that this bike came in this slate gray with orange, which orange is like my favorite color, so I love the orange. I love the topo lines. I'm a map geek, so that just tickles my brain. I really, really love this color profile, this color scheme, and just the overall look of this bike, especially when you've got the crash bars on there and the skid plate. And I just think, in my mind, when I imagine a sort of a perfect dual sport, this is it. This is it. This is what I imagine. These colors, this look, I just love everything about it. So I know it's subjective, but damn, my girl is a 10 out of 10. That's right, sweetie, 10 out of 10. Sexy. I do have a few minor gripes. And I think the most glaring one, and everybody sort of knows about this gripe, is the throttle. I spoke about this in my first impressions video. The throttle is twitchy. It's really twitchy. The slightest little bit of input either way, you're either lurching forward or lurching backward. And it takes some getting used to. And I tried to remedy it by putting on a throttle tamer. And I'll be honest with you guys, I'm not sure the throttle tamer did much, if anything. Now, I do know that some people have changed the ECU out on this bike to try to handle the twitchy throttle. I'm not a big fan of swapping out the ECU. I know it reduces the gas mileage and just messes with the computer and messes with the check engine light. And so that's why I went with the mechanical, the physical fix, and it didn't really fix it. So I would say probably don't bother and just get used to it. And if you want to try the ECU, try the ECU. But that is one really important thing to know about this bike. It does have a twitchy throttle. The other thing that I've only recently come to discover with this bike that's very annoying, but thankfully is very easily solvable, is this bike comes with this little indicator light on the instrument cluster, a rev indicator that blinks when you get too revvy. What Honda does is they program that to start blinking at 7,200 RPM because they've programmed it for the break-in period. And I didn't know that. And so I've been riding this bike for 1,600 miles, and every time I hit 70 miles per hour, the thing starts blinking at me, blink, 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 and it's so annoying. But I found out in the owner's manual, you can actually adjust that. And so I've cranked it up 1,000 RPM, and so now, unless I'm going 80 miles per hour, the thing doesn't start blinking, which is how it should be. As soon as you get through that break-in period, open the owner's manual, do the quick thing to adjust it, bump it up 1,000 RPM, and you're golden. So I can appreciate Honda setting that for the break-in period, but it is very annoying that it just constantly blinks at you anytime you get over like 60 miles per hour. Now, obviously I talked about the wind protection, lack thereof. That's a small gripe if you're not used to it. Even with this windshield though, it didn't really fully solve the problem, so just keep that in mind if you do put on a windshield. Another quick note is obviously this bike doesn't have a center stand, which at first really bothered me because I was used to having one on all of my other bikes. Just, it's nice for servicing, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much weight that adds to a bike. I actually prefer it now without. And I've got a rear stand that I can jack the bike up on when I'm doing service or doing chain maintenance or whatever. So it hasn't been a problem, at least in the garage. Now, if I get a flat out here and I have to put the bike up on a log or something, that could be a little bit more problematic. But for now, I like the fact that I'm saving probably 20 pounds by not having a center stand. I do wish the bike came with LED lights. I think it's very annoying that the Honda Trail had LED lights, but this does not. So you do have all standard light bulbs in this bike, which is a little frustrating. I mean, it's like, come on, it's 2024. Let's put LED lights in the bike, for crying out loud. Yeah, so that's just a minor gripe. Obviously, there's no comfort amenities on this thing, like you're not gonna get cruise control, and you're also not gonna get rider modes or anything like that. The only thing that I can turn on and off on this bike is the ABS. Going back to the tires for a second, I did speak to how much I like the tires. However, do keep in mind that they're tubed, so you do have to deal with replacing tubes if you get a flat, but they are spoked as well, so that's nice. You get the spoke tires, but yes, they are tubed. I did speak about the fuel capacity, which is obviously something to consider, but that just comes with the territory, and obviously the ground clearance is something to keep in mind as well. And the suspension might be soft to some people considering this bike. And that covers it. I'm looking at my notes and I've got nothing else on here other than to say I love this bike. I'm excited about it, and I told you this review was going to sound biased, but overall, if I total up all these scores, I rank this bike a 9 out of 10 for what it is and for what it serves, the purpose it serves for me. So that's very high, and I promise you I'm not just giving it that high of a rating because I'm trying to convince myself that I made a good purchase, at least not yet. Maybe I need some more reflection on it. I think I'll have more information once I take that long trip this summer. But for everything that I've taken this bike through so far and all the journeys I've been on, I think it really does merit a 9 out of 10. That's my honest review. Thank you so much for watching and for sticking around to the end. I hope this was very helpful. It's starting to get a little bit late in the day, and I still want to get out and have some fun on this bike before I need to get home. So I'm going to take off. Take care, everyone. Be safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.